We now move on to our next speaker, Alexandra Jonca. And Alexandra is a project officer at the UK Green Building Council, and she's been focusing her latest project on the Net Zero Whole Life Carbon Roadmap. And this project is bringing together 90 individuals from across industry and government to collaborate on solutions. And with collaboration at the heart of this, the roadmap doesn't just lay out a net zero pathway, it shows us how to secure the support of relevant market actors to make those big systemic changes. Now, Alexandra has form here. Early in her career, she was responsible for recruiting stakeholder signatories to the World GBC Net Zero Carbon Buildings Commitment. She's worked across industry to develop resources for the UK GBC's Advancing Net Zero programme. And before that, as a researcher at Lund University in Sweden, Alexandra was working on the Sharing Cities Sweden project. So that's an awful lot of collaboration and engagement in her career. So today, Alexandra is going to give us an overview of the UK GBC's roadmap, and particularly look at the trajectory and the embodied carbon recommendations for local authorities. This information is actually embargoed until launch at COP26, so we're really privileged to have Alexandra here to share it with us. I will hand you over to Alexandra.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Pippa. I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully you can see that. Let me know if not. So as Pippa mentioned, I've been working on this project for most of the last year. And the Net Zero Whole Life Carbon Roadmap project is a part of the Building Life project. This is a project run by the World Green Building Council and supports 10 different European Green Building Councils in developing their own national roadmaps. So our ambition here is to develop a roadmap of actions and secure the support of different relevant market actors in supporting these actions and committing to delivering them to be able to achieve a decarbonized built environment in the UK. So yes, over 90 individuals have been involved in the project throughout the steering group and task groups, representing over 70 organizations. We also have government and city representatives involved as well. And they're the ones that have really developed some of the proposals that I'll be presenting in front of you today. Here in the UK, we are building on some pre-existing work by the Green Construction Board from 2013, which set out a roadmap to an 80% emission reduction scenario for the built environment by 2050. And so we are updating this within the roadmap project to a net zero built environment by 2050. We recently underwent our public consultation for the proposals in the roadmap, which also included workshops for the general public, for local authorities, and also for the devolved governments, and have been busy spending the last couple of months incorporating a lot of this feedback into the final roadmap outputs. These final outputs are going to be launched at COP26 on November 11th within the Blue Zone in the UK Pavilion specifically, but we are going to be streaming this event for anyone to be able to attend. So as for what's in the roadmap, there's a few key elements. One is identifying a carbon footprint for the UK built environment as defined on a consumption basis to be able to account for all the emissions the built environment sector is responsible for, as well as a net zero scenario that details an emissions budget and trajectory for the UK built environment to get to net zero by 2050. This is then supported by a number of policy recommendations for central government and local authorities, and also a suite of stakeholder action plans, which are individualized plans for about 15 stakeholders in the built environment, such as architects, engineers, etc., detailing some of the urgent actions that they need to be taking now in order to get the sector on track to deliver that trajectory. So, of course, to understand where we need to go, we first must understand what our carbon footprint as a sector is. And so this infographic shows you the latest CCC data set broken down into emissions associated with the built environment, plus the inclusion of imported emissions. So emissions from the materials that are imported from other countries for the use of construction, which the CCC does exclude in their analysis. So the carbon footprint of the UK built environment will of course differ depending on what's included in the scope. But if we're looking at what is in the direct control of the built environment, then this represents about 27% of UK emissions on this consumption basis. And so of this 27%, about 22% of that is embodied carbon, 61% is operational emissions from buildings and infrastructure, and then about 17% is from unregulated energy. You'll often see a figure floating around about the built environment being responsible for 40% of UK emissions, and that often occurs when surface transport is included in the scope. So if we took that same approach here, then we'd also get approximately 40%. But if we're looking at direct control, we're talking about 27% of emissions. So the percentage may differ, but the key question here is whether we're making progress quickly enough as a sector. And so since 2010, which is the data baseline essentially from that 2013 route map I was mentioning on, there has been about a 25% reduction in built environment emissions, but this is largely due to grid decarbonization. So we've been able to benefit as a sector from the grid decarbonization that's occurring. And while that is projected to continue, this is going to start to flatten out, and we're going to need to start reducing emissions in other areas as well. To zero in on the embodied carbon bit of the trajectory here. So as I said, about 22% of built environment emissions today are attributable to the built environment. And these have decreased by 20% since 1990, which is the latest baseline that we have data for. However, since 2010, this has actually been on an increase. And so embodied carbon emissions since 2010 have increased by about 12%. And actually, what our trajectory indicates, based on the forward-looking projections that the task groups have put together, is that by 2035, approximately half of built environment emissions are going to be from embodied carbon, which means it's critical that we start thinking about how to manage and reduce this embodied carbon now. So the trajectory model does include for things like improved material efficiencies, increasing the reuse of materials in buildings, reducing building demand growth, and many other aspects related to circularity and reducing embodied carbon. And so now we must figure out how to deliver these changes. To highlight a few of the key central government policy asks that are coming out of the roadmap, this does include the regulation of embodied carbon. Currently, while a lot of leaders in the field might measure and manage their embodied carbon on projects, this does not happen at a very wide scale, and there really is nothing in the legislative framework to reduce embodied carbon. So this would start with measurement for large buildings and major refurbishments for whole life carbon, and then eventually move into all sectors and asset types and set limits for upfront carbon as well. We also view planning reforms as being critical to be able to prioritize the reuse of existing buildings and assets, and also disincentivize demolition. And so this would be requiring the evaluation of embodied carbon impacts at the beginning of the planning process before being permitted demolition rights. And finally, the longstanding industry ask about removing VAT on refurbishment works, with some caveats on retaining the building's structural frame and achieving energy performance targets. As for the recommendations for local authorities within the roadmap, we all know that local authorities can often leverage their opportunities to go further, and this is something that the task group certainly supported. A lot of the recommendations within the roadmap are based on the New Homes Policy Playbook from UK Green Building Council. And so since I can only give you a brief snapshot today, I would also encourage you to look at this document later on if you want some more of the details, and I can drop a link to it as well. But the roadmap does say that local authorities should be going above and beyond planning requirements and begin introducing requirements that focus on whole life carbon and reducing upfront carbon, and are also focused on reuse and circularity. So this can be through requiring the provision of a circular economy statement, which would require applicants to show how they're using design stage actions or what actions they're taking to reduce embodied carbon. And this should help planning teams be able to critically appraise the need for demolition and try to seek the reuse of foundations and structures in existing development sites. We can also request that major developments begin to measure and calculate their whole life cycle carbon emissions. There are the tools available to do this. And as well as provide the circular economy statement and show what actions are being taken to reduce embodied carbon. And finally, there are also requests to monitor any of these performance changes from the as designed versus the as built embodied carbon assessments at the end of a project. Now, we know definitely, and this is something acknowledged in the local authorities workshops and by the task group teams, that capacity is often limited in local authorities. And the skills and training angle is something that does run through the roadmap and a lot of the other recommendations as well, and making sure that local authorities and all stakeholders are being equipped with these circular and other skills to be able to deliver a net zero scenario. Finally, just a couple other quick recommendations that go beyond what was in that new homes policy playbook I was mentioning. One was to contribute to the development of national embodied carbon assessment approaches and tools and link to industry-wide data sets doing this. The roadmap does put its weight behind the built environment carbon database, which UKGBC supports, along with many other industry actors like REBA and RICS, for that to become a nationally recognized data set used in the built environment industry to later set standards and limits. And we do think local authorities should be feeding into this when possible. And finally, just appraising opportunities within a region or within the local authority to get a better understanding of what existing assets are in the local authority and make sure the most efficient use of that stock is being used to help dampen the demand for new build as well. Eventually, we think local authorities could play a really key role in enabling the circular economy by enabling distribution hubs and frameworks that could help source reused materials for different projects and connect demolition projects with new builds when they are required. So thank you very much for listening to me today. Just a couple next quick updates. Like I said, we're launching the roadmap on the 11th of November. You'll be able to watch this. And then we're also going to be hosting an industry event in early December, focusing a bit more on the implications of the roadmap for industry as opposed to the policy side. And if you do want to be alerted to these opportunities, please do just email me and I can sign you up to the mailing list so you know about these when they come up. And thank you very much.